Welcome to the Explainer. Today we're looking at something deeply personal and honestly, universally challenging. We're talking about relationship conflicts. We're going to unpack a really fascinating source text that completely reframes why we fight, where communication just totally breaks down, and most importantly, why our usual attempts to fix these fights so often fail. Okay, let's dive into this. Have you ever just hit an absolute brick wall with your partner? You know that feeling, right? It brings up a very common, very desperate question that our source text tackles right out of the gate. If we just can't communicate, if we're completely exhausted, should we just break up and cut our losses? It's a highly relatable reaction, especially when it feels like you're speaking two completely different languages. But the source text pushes back really hard against that flight instinct. It argues that a stubborn, forced breakup executed purely out of frustration and self-interest creates massive collateral damage. The text actually calls it bleeding. The foundational principle here is that if a separation absolutely must happen, it has to be done out of care for the other person, not just as a quick escape hatch for yourself. Breaking up stubbornly actually violates a natural law of human connection. To understand why we so often want to just run away from conflict, we have to look at how we view our own intelligence and capability in a relationship. And that brings us to section 1, knowing versus truly explaining. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is how the source completely redefines what it means to be smart or right in an argument. It draws this massive, absolutely critical gap between simply knowing something and actually making someone else understand it. Knowing is framed as a mere gift from nature, whereas making your partner understand, well, that's an earned skill forged through deliberate study and effort. Let's break that down a bit further. The text argues that knowing is really just an innate ability to perceive a situation. If you ever find yourself in an argument thinking, I'm right and my partner is wrong, or I just get this and they don't, well, the source offers a pretty humbling reality check. That baseline knowledge or talent, it wasn't created by you, it was granted to you by nature or the universe. Claiming superiority because you quote-unquote know something is kind of like claiming superiority because you have blue eyes. It's just not a personal achievement. Explaining, on the other hand, is the active, cultivated skill of correcting a misunderstanding and successfully guiding your partner to clarity. And this brilliantly illustrates the core argument of the text. You only prove you're better or more advanced in a conflict if you can successfully guide your partner to understanding. If you know the facts but literally cannot make them understand, you aren't superior. You simply lack the necessary communication skills to teach. And, when we fail to recognize our own lack of explanatory skill, the dynamic shifts into some pretty dangerous territory. Which leads us to section 2, the trap of arrogance. So here's the exact sequence where things go crooked. We fall right into the arrogance trap. You start by believing you're inherently superior because you possess that gift of knowing. Then, because you lack the skill to actually explain it, you blame your partner's so-called inability to grasp the situation. Frustration peaks, you decide to end things, and eventually you end up looking down on it and despising the other person. The source identifies this arrogance as the precise root rot of the relationship. And if you just bolt when you hit this stage, the text offers this incredibly striking and frankly slightly humorous metaphor. It says, if you avoid dung because you're scared of it, you will just step in worse dung later. In other words, running from a relationship without fixing your own communication flaws literally guarantees that you will repeat the exact same mistake. Your lack of skill is just going to manifest as a bigger disaster in your next relationship. So how do we stop stepping in it? Well, we need a completely different approach to fix this destructive cycle. That brings us to section 3, diagnosing the root cause. The source uses a fantastic medical metaphor right here to emphasize the depth of the work required. When you have a complex, painful illness, you don't just blindly pop an aspirin, right? Aspirin might numb the symptom for a fleeting moment, but it's definitely not a cure-all. Similarly, you can't just blindly treat relationship pain, like, say, forcing a superficial compromise or just storming out of the room, without doing a proper deep analysis of the true disease that's causing the friction. So here is the precise method the text provides for that internal reflection. Step 1, acknowledge the pain and the friction honestly. Step 2, trace the origin of the fault without bias. And step 3, claim your own share of the blame. So the crucial point is doing this deep internal audit, even if it feels highly embarrassing or, shameful to admit that you were the one lacking. In the heat of an argument, our human instinct is to color the entire pie as partner's fault. Obviously. But the reality of the source text demands we carve out a very significant slice for my own lack of skill. We have to actively admit that our inability to explain, to guide, and to communicate effectively is a massive piece of the pie.
Because until we claim that slice, we remain entirely blind to the solution.
The stakes here are incredibly clear. If your default action is constantly blaming others, the result, according to the text, is stagnation for both partners. You both stay stuck. And strangely, nothing in your life goes well. But if your action is to look inward, blaming yourself for your lack of skill in making them understand, the result is immediate growth, forward progress, and the instant cessation of contempt. Owning your faults is what actually clears the path for things to start going right again. Once we've identified our own lack of skill, what's the next step? Whether you realize you need to stay and work on things or decide you truly must part ways, it all comes down to how you communicate that realization.
Let's move to our final section, seeking true forgiveness.
If you've done the deep analysis and realize you truly do not have the skill to fix things right now, the text outlines what we can call the honest breakup. It requires true humility. You admit your lack of skill. You apologize specifically for failing to guide them properly. You state that you need to step back for your own self-improvement and study. And only then do you separate logically and amicably. By framing the breakup around your own need to grow, you prevent the other person from harboring deep resentment. But what if you're trying to stay and fix the relationship? Well, there's a very strict rule laid out here. Imagine saying, "I don't know what I did, but please forgive me." The source insists that this kind of blind plea is instantly rejected. Empty apologies, whether they're directed to your partner, to God, or to the universe, are completely meaningless and fundamentally useless if you haven't done the root cause analysis to know exactly what you did wrong. This leads us to the ultimate law of forgiveness presented in the text. The universe, or your partner, is essentially going to ask, what exactly are you apologizing for? You must be able to answer logically and clearly. You have to be able to say, I lacked the skill to communicate, I acted with arrogance, and I failed to guide us. Only when you can articulate your exact faults with that level of absolute clarity is the apology truly accepted. And only then, the text argues, is new strength and renewed energy granted to you to move forward. Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought to consider. Think about your current relationship or maybe your last major conflict. If you were asked right now, do you actually know what you're apologizing for? Or are you just trying to blindly take aspirin to avoid the pain? The next time you find yourself frustrated, take a look in that communication mirror. Analyze your own lack of skill, and you might just find the genuine key to true connection. Thanks for joining me on this explainer. Keep learning, and I'll see you next time.